All right, so I think we're going to get started because I'm not seeing anybody else popping in. And as a warning, I just started the recording, so keep that in mind. If you want to turn camera on or whatever, you're welcome, but you'll get recorded. When you have questions, this one's going to be pretty informal, I think, so if you have questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question. I'm going to sort of do an overview of what's changed this year. Then we're going to do a little bit more focus on each of the changed questions. And then we can talk about whatever you want after that. So as a reminder, we're talking about the Public Library Annual Report for 2021. The annual report happens every year, and libraries throughout the nation contribute to this report that gets managed overall by IMLS. Institute of Museum and Library Services. So thanks to everyone for all the time that they spend on the report. I know it's a bear, and I know that it's a lot of work in addition to all the work that you already have. So I always really appreciate that you're willing to do it. A sort of addendum to that is if there's ever anything I can do to make it less work on your behalf, please let me know. That basically means if you have a question at any point, never hesitate to ask me. I would much rather you ask. I get like a million emails than I found out a couple of staff, librarians are just hitting their head against the wall somewhere. So always get in touch if you have any questions. Let's see. Yay. Okay. Welcome, Bree. Sorry about that. It looks like you're in now, hopefully. Okay, so changes for this year, 2021. It's a mix of IMLS changes and Department of Libraries changes. There's sort of one big one and then a few smaller ones. It's not as big a change as last year when we had all of the COVID questions appear. So again, I'm hoping that this will be relatively straightforward. The big changes are one, programming categories have expanded significantly. We'll look at those, but basically there's new location options and new age categories. So there's just going to be more of those. That was an IMLS decision. We ask about non-traditional items, which we haven't asked previously. That's, again, also an IMLS thing, and we'll talk about that in a sec. Grants received. We tweaked the grants received section on the report just a little bit in the hopes that it's slightly less work. We'll see, but we'll talk about that. We added a question about fines, though you don't need a number. You just tell us whether you charge fines. And then we've moved the what's new and successes, the narrative questions that were at the end of the report. We have taken them out of the report, and we're going to do a separate survey about them in the hopes that it will be less annoying if you haven't already just completed a 25-page report to ask you this one more narrative question. Okay, so that's the overview. Now we're going to hop through each of the sections. So I'll do a section and then pause for questions on the section if that works for y'all. All right. Okay. So the programming changes one. This is a big change for this year, or at least in terms of how many number of questions. It's a big change. Formerly, so programming has basically two categories. There's how many programs did you do, and what was the attendance. And that's still the case. But previously, up until 2 years ago, the question assumed that everything was in person, that there were only in-person categories. Last year, we added virtual because of COVID, obviously, because a huge amount of programming was moving virtual and we didn't want to totally miss it. So last year, we added virtual. This year, they've also added, they officially added virtual. Last year, we had done it ourselves, as a lot of other states had. But this year, they added offsite as well. So that now they want folks to break out things that are on site at the library property, off site, anywhere else, and then virtual, which is, again, live virtual events that you're doing on Facebook or YouTube or Zoom or really anything like that where it's live and you're interacting with patrons in real time. Okay, so that's the first piece, is that we've added a new locations. So there's now 3 locations. The second piece is that they've added more age brackets. Previously, the age brackets were kids, which is anybody up to 11, teens, which is 12 to 18, and adults, which is 19 and up. So that was for the previous quite a while, those were the options. This year, they've added 2 new categories. There's a new one that is ages 0 through 5. So they've broken out the youngest of the children into 0 through 5. And this is predominantly because people are interested in numbers on early literacy and they want to see programs that are supporting early literacy. So that's why that category is there. And then additionally, they added something that people have been talking about for as long as I know, a general audience category, which is basically an event that really is not focused at any age range. It could be a family event, it could be intergenerational, anything that's really not for one specific age group can go in that category. So that means now there are 3 locations and 5 different age ranges, which means we're asking for a lot of questions there. There's asking for a lot of different statistics there, and it's a lot. And I know that, we recognize that. But I think for the next few years, it's just people are going to do the best they can with the data they have. I mean, at best, these new questions weren't official until July. So at best, you didn't know that was happening until July, and you may not have known up until now. So you may not have the data. We understand that. That happens whenever there's a change in the report. So if you don't have the data, you could kind of reverse engineer it if that seems like a practical thing that's not going to be a ton of work, but don't put a ton of work into that. Alternately, if you don't have the new 0 through 5 or the new general audience, just leave those 2 blank. Put all the kids in the 6 through 11 category. Don't put anything in general audience, and we will fix it on the back end because they're sort of having a transitional period where some of the old categories are still there. Oh, I have a chat that I haven't answered yet. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Some of you were reporting on calendar year 2020. Yes, that's another thing that makes it extra complicated when these are the case, because if there's a change, the lead time is enormous because you're reporting on 2020. So it's always, you do what you have with the numbers you have, and that's basically that is sort of the short version of the report is do what you have with the numbers you have, and we understand that it's you may not have exactly what they're asking for. Okay, so yeah, so basically this section is just a lot longer than it was before because you're like, okay, in person 0 through 5, in person 6 through 11, in person 12 through 18, in person 19 plus, in person general audience. And then you do the same thing for offsite, and then you do the same thing for virtual. And then, boom, you move over to attendance, and you do the same thing for attendance. So attendance is broken into the 3 categories and 5 age ranges. As a reminder, this has always been the case, but as a reminder for attendance, we are only interested in how in what the age range of the program is. When you're doing attendance, when you put people in age ranges, you don't care how old they are, you care who the program is targeting. So if you have a program that is intended for 0 through 5-year-olds, but there are a bunch of adults, they still go into the 0 to 5 category. So you never have to ask anybody how old they are, because that's awkward. Okay, so that is one, and that is the biggest change in the report is programming changes and the new categories. Does anybody have questions on them? Feel free to either unmute yourself or put something in the chat, and we can field that. Okay, if you think of a question later, we can hop into that. And again, I just want to reiterate that we know everybody won't have the questions. In fact, in many cases, most people shouldn't have the questions for those specific categories, and just do the best you can. And always, if you have questions, ask me. So we'll jump on to the next one. Non-traditional items. This is another change at the federal level. IMLS added 2 different questions about non-traditional items. Non-traditional items in this context means basically everything that's not books, DVDs, CDs, all the stuff that you were offering, or that we've always captured. So muffin tins, skateboards, snowshoes, puzzles, anything like that that gets checked out and checked back in. So it's if it's a one-time thing, this is not what we're interested in. But if it's anything that's coming back to you afterwards, is what we're interested in. Additionally, okay, so there's basically two questions. There's how many do you have, which is going to be under the holdings section, and there's how many times did they go out. So how many did you have? In both cases, the question is if things go out as a set, like if you have a whole batch of baking supplies or a whole batch of gardening things that go out as one set, you always check them out together. They count as one item. You don't need to break them down. If you have a set of puzzles, like you give people 6 puzzles every time, poof, they count as one item. So in holdings, that's a separate section. That's a number that we weren't really capturing before because they weren't asking it. They only asked how many books and DVDs and CDs you had. Under circulation, because you may only be getting a big circulation number, this number, these historically have fallen into the overall circulation number, and we still want that to happen. So there's basically the big number is everything that you circed from the library. But then there's also the subset, which is if you can get the number, and maybe and that might be more or less challenging. If you can't get the number, how many times did these non-traditional items circulate? And so that should end up in both places. It should end up in your overall circulation numbers for physical circulation numbers, and also in this one little subset question, which is how often did your non-traditional items circulate? That's basically the non-traditional items changes. Any questions on those?
Josh?
Yeah.
This is Marie, if I may ask. So for those of us who are reporting on 2020, it would be what we held in 2020 as non-traditional items, right?
Yes. So, okay, that's a great question. So, and this sort of covers a lot of ground, but yes. So if you can get that number, that's great. If you can't get that number, if there's ever a situation where, particularly in the holding section, because I know there's a fair amount, it's sometimes hard to get retroactive numbers in holdings. If you can't get the retroactive number, if you can't get 2020 in this case, I would just use whatever number you have, even if it's just the current number, even knowing that there might have been a little bit of change, because it's closer than not a number, unless you know that you only had like 3 things then and now you have 150. Otherwise, if that number isn't available, I would feel confident in using your current number because I feel like that's probably relatively close. Does that make sense overall?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for asking that. And that covers a lot of ground in general. I think particularly in the holding section, if you've ever come across that. Any other questions in non-traditional items?
Yes, Josh, this is Janet from Grand Isle.
Hi, Janet.
Sorry if I may have already asked this of you before, but I can't remember, so I'll ask again.
No worries.
I'm not sure. I have like these mystery bag. They check in and out,
Gotcha.
just like they're basically adult mystery bags, and each little bag has a theme, and inside the bag are 3 murder mysteries that are themed to what the outside of the bag says. So the bag itself has the barcode sort of attached. Patrons aren't supposed to look inside. They just take a chance and say, I'm going to read about, murders in the kitchen or something. But inside are the 3 books, which have also been checked out under quote unquote mystery bag in my system. But they come back to the library. So it's almost like they grab a bag, they bring it to the front counter, check it out, bring it home, read the books, come back. Would that be considered more my catalog, my books, the book holdings, or would that be a non-traditional item?
So I think the big question is making sure that these circulations are getting captured.
They are.
But do they get captured each time they go out? Or
The books themselves, the 3 little paperbacks in each of they're like a set of 3. Each of those books has been checked out to the category called mystery bags, and that is in I use Destiny for my cataloging program. So I've figured out in Destiny how I can create, I've got like this subcategory called mystery bags. So I can isolate only just the mystery bags that got checked out. If I take away like books or other items, I can look up, I can get a number on how many times just the mystery bags went out.
Gotcha. Okay. So my inclination would be to just use that as the normal book circulation and not treat it as non-traditional, unless for some reason the way that you if and this is sort of more generally, if the way that you're doing it, those numbers aren't getting captured. I would say that the important thing is that they end up somewhere, that people are checking things out and those numbers are getting somewhere. My inclination, if it's something like a book, is to just treat it like a book and not even if it's a set of books. I would
Right.
Yeah. Does that make
Because
sense?
the books themselves just get checked out. They remain sort of checked out under the auspices of the mystery bag category. So it's not like those 3 mysteries are getting those books inside the bag. It's kind of like a nesting system, I guess.
Gotcha. So
It's not like those 3 paperbacks are checked in and out each time. Just the mystery bag itself gets checked in and out.
okay. So what I would do, this is a little more work. So, but my suggestion is, um, uh, that what you might want to do, again, this might be more work than you want, is figure out how many times the mystery bags go out and just multiply that by how many books are in them, or on average, how many books are in them, and put that into your normal book circulation.
Okay. Yeah, that would be easy. Yeah.
If that's doable, that's, I think, right, because I think IMLS is mostly trying to capture things that we were not capturing at all before. So I think if that's possible, that would be my suggestion.
Okay. So that would be like saying, I would be able to tell each time the books themselves get checked out as part of the mystery bag. It sounds like you're saying those 3 little paperbacks got checked out, checked back in, checked out, checked back in. That's the number I'm looking for.
Yes, that's what I would use if you could use it, because really, if you take away the bag, that's what the patron would have been doing. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, thank you.
if that works, and if that doesn't, sometimes things I suggest are more work than they should be, and feel free to come back to me.
All I know is I multiply by 3 per bag.
That sounds like a good system then.
Thank you so much. I'll mute now. Thank you.
Thank you much. Any other questions on non-traditional items? Okay, so we'll hop to the next. These are sort of in order of magnitude. So the next one is grants received. So as I said, we made a minor change to the way that the grants received section worked. Previously, we just had a list of grants, summer performer grant, career grant, etc. And you were just supposed to put in how much you received in that category for each of the grants, which meant that the section was fairly long because there were a bunch of different grants. The new approach is that there's sort of just check boxes for the grants that you may or may not have received, and you say yes or no. And then at the end, there's categories, and you put the total in the category. So the total, and it gives you it sort of coaches you on what goes where. So the categories are state grants, federal grants, and other grants. So at this point, we're just looking for a total. We don't need to know exactly how much was in each grant. Grants are always a little bit involved and fiddly, so we're always happy to help if you ever get to a roadblock on those. But the hope was it's just shorter, a little bit shorter, and you just do a smidge of math and put it together. We'll see if it's actually better. Y'all can give it a spin, and you can totally say this is actually worse, and then we'll probably switch back or come up with something else. But again, it tries to coach you through the grants that we know we're running around in the most recent year, but we'll see how that goes. Questions about the grants received changes? Okay, we'll hop to the other one, and if you think of questions later, please feel free to do them. Other changes, which are not a huge amount. One, there's a section about charging non-resident fees, and we've kept that in there, but we also added right at the end of that another question, which is, do you charge fines? And it's a yes/no question. we're not asking how much you make on fines. We are just asking if you charge fines. And there's basically three options, which is we charge fines on basically everything. We charge fines on some things. I'm specifically thinking of places that maybe charge video fines, but not on books. But there are other cases, or maybe they charge adult fines, but not kids fines. So that would be in the some category, or none. We don't charge any fines. And this question, because I know there's been a lot of change around this this year. It's asking, did you charge fines as of the last day of your reporting period? If anybody had a change during the year. So that's, again, that's more of a, that's a yes, no. You don't actually have to know the number for that, but that's fines. And then the last one is the narrative questions, which were what's new and successes. And those are great. I love them. And I love reading about them. The sort of complicated, there's a couple of complicated factors. One, it's a little, I feel like, having not filled out the report firsthand, I feel like it's a little disheartening to fill out the whole report and then come to the end where we say, oh, and could you do an essay at the end? It's like one of those tests where it's a really long test and then they throw an essay on the end. So I feel a little bit bad about that. And I feel like we might get better information if we just remove it totally. So they're going to be a separate survey that we're just going to, a two question survey with our intention that we're going to ask that every 6 months. So that's the other piece, is because of reporting periods, people are reporting on all sorts of things when they talk about their successes. Like you might be talking about a year and a half ago, or you might be talking about what just happened, and people sort of apply. They're like, should I talk about the last 6 months or reporting period? So we're moving it to a different survey. So I think where we can get more frequent, more timely data. And my intention is roughly to do that roughly the beginning of the year and middle of the year will be the two timeframes. But we'll give a bunch of heads up when that happens. Any questions about those two changes? Okay, we're gonna hop to the next one, which I think is just telling you thanks. So those are all the big changes. There's a few minor language changes at various parts of the report. We've changed the weeks and hours a little bit because last year there was basically, oh, if answer this if COVID didn't apply, and answer this if COVID did apply, and nobody's in a range where COVID didn't apply anymore. So we kind of took that section out. So hopefully it's clearer. Oh, one other thing that I did was last year there were a couple of sections where the questions were didn't come up in order because we had to kind of infill them. So it would be like, oh, 27B followed by 23B followed by 27C. And we fixed all those. So when we talk about questions, they're actually in order now, and hopefully that'll make it easier. But okay, so now general questions, either about changes or about anything else about the report. Anybody who wants to, just unmute yourself or put it in the chat.
Josh, this is Debbie Roederer.
Hi there.
I have a question about Launchpads. Are you familiar with those?
They're
kind of a tablet that's mostly aimed for kids, but they have adult ones as well for language learning and other topics. My question is, are those, it's a tablet that's pre-programmed with things on it, activities and learning whatever. So my question is, are those, they're not really a video, they're not really an audio, they're not a book, they're not a magazine. Are they non-traditional, or is that an electronic resource?
That's a great question. As you can maybe tell by my face. That's a great question. And I don't have an immediate great answer. So there is a section over at the end, sort of computers. There's a section about things that you basically public computers, things that are you primarily to use the internet that you use in the building.
Internet.
And so that's that's not going to be a good fit. But that's like the edging towards the right answer, but it's not. I think I'm going to have to run that by my colleagues at other states and see if they have a good answer. So I give something that is where there's some consistency. But Yeah, that's a thing that I think has been talked about, because there's not actually a great way to capture sort of, yeah, that it sort of falls in between the cracks. My answer, until I come up with a better answer, is that non-traditional might actually be the best answer, even though it's a little bit outside of what we think of as non-traditional.
It's not a cake pan, but
Yeah, exactly. But I'll get you a better answer, and I'll share it out with everybody when I get it. I think that it has come up before. I think people on the listserv have talked about launch pads. But yeah, the other categories, most of the other categories are you're downloading something or you're accessing something on the internet, and it is something else. It's like, so tentatively non-traditional, but I'll get a better answer for you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you much. Thank you. Is it a traditional non-traditional item or a non-traditional non-traditional item? Is a great question, and a delightful riddle, which I never hope to answer. Other questions about general, either changes this year or anything at all?
I can ask another one if nobody else has a question.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Every year we bind the annual, all the issues of our local newspaper into 2 volumes of, they're big books. Do those count as books or not in our holdings?
I think that's a book. At that point, yeah, I think it's not. I mean, people. Well, is it? I mean, either way, whether it's people are pull it off the shelf, it's probably internal. I mean, inside use.
In use, yes, in library only.
But I think effectively you have made a book at that point. I mean, if you had, and that's probably, I think, the most logical way to, but I would call it a book, I think, in that context.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Any other questions? I'm happy to answer, or as you've spotted, maybe not answer questions, but start to think about questions. All right, well, I'll give my last pitch, and if anybody thinks a question while I'm saying this. Once again, thank you so much for being willing to do the report. I know it's a lot of work, and it's involved, and it is not always intuitive, and I really appreciate that y'all are willing to do it, and that you put so much time and effort into it. If you have questions at any point, do not hesitate to get in touch. There are some resources that we have a webpage about the report. You are old hat, so that's fine, but it's there. It may be helpful. It has some information on like online resources and frequently asked questions, but the short version is never, ever, ever hesitate to get in touch if you have a question. I really, really appreciate it, and I would much rather have a million questions than have somebody say, yeah, I spent an entire afternoon on this section and I don't think I got it right. Please don't do that. So unless any more questions have appeared, I think we're all set. I really appreciate everybody taking time to come out for this. And the recording will be available. The recording of the session yesterday will also be available. But so always just ask me questions and we'll go from there. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you. You all take care. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks again, Josh. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you much.